This dude is about to jump 25,000 feet out of a plane without a parachute. He's going to launch himself out of those doors and free fall at 120 miles per hour for 2.5 minutes before hitting the ground.
What am I doing? Why would you do something like this?
Once he steps out, there's zero room for error and there's no plan B. But if he pulls it off, well, it'll be huge. No one in history has ever attempted something like this before, and for good reason.
If it costs you your life, is it worth it?
I guess the answer is no. If it costs you your life, it's not worth it.
Now, it goes without saying that this is insanely dangerous. But don't be thinking this was some spontaneous weekend stunt. Pulling something off like this and, still being alive by the end of it takes a whole lot of skill and some serious planning.
This is the natural progression of somebody that has dedicated their whole life to understand how to pursue their potential.
This is, without a doubt, the most outrageous skydive ever attempted.
Jumpers on. Godspeed, Luke Aikins.
See that guy next to David Blaine? That's Luke Aikins.
He's the best in the world.
Luke's been part of the Red Bull Air Force since 2005, punched in over 21,000 jumps, and spent endless hours in airplanes doing stuff like this. In fact, Luke's been in the skydiving game almost his entire life.
I probably made a conscious choice to want to jump out of a plane by the time I was 4 years old.
Skydiving is practically in this guy's blood. His grandpa got the whole family into it, and they've been running a dive school out of Washington for over 45 years. And that kind of lifelong dedication opens some doors. Seriously cool doors. Being part of the Red Bull crew means Luke's basically had adrenaline on tap for the last 20 years. And if he's not falling out of planes, then chances are he's working behind the scenes on something even more epic. Remember that space jump in 2015?
I'm going over.
Luke spent 3.5 years testing and designing gear for that. But the Red Bull stuff is just the start of his resume. You might have already seen him in action without even realizing it. Recognize this scene from Iron Man 3?
It's a chunky monkey, let's get it.
Yup, that's Luke. How about this one from Godzilla? Or this Doritos commercial? All him. More recently, he coordinated David Blaine's ascension stunt and taught Orlando Bloom to wingsuit.
What do you think of that?
By the time Luke was gearing up for his stunt in 2016, jumping without a parachute wasn't exactly a new concept. Technically, the record for the highest fall without a parachute belongs to this woman. Although that wasn't exactly by choice. In 1972, Vensa was working as an air hostess when a briefcase bomb ripped the plane apart over what's now the Czech Republic. Of the 28 people on board, she was the sole survivor, pinned inside the tail section, plummeting 33,300 feet before crash landing into a snow-covered mountain. She survived, but she was pretty badly messed up. Vensa suffered a fractured skull, 3 broken vertebrae, 2 broken legs, broken ribs, and a shattered pelvis. Amazingly, after 3 days in a coma and several months in hospital, she made a full recovery and wasn't even afraid of flying afterward either. And before Vensa, World War II saw a bunch of people unintentionally free-falling their way into the record books. In fact, at least 3 soldiers survived falling out of planes, the most rad of which was this British dude. After his plane caught fire, he backflipped out at 18,000 feet, fully accepting his fate, only to hit some trees and land in a pile of snow. He woke up hours later, lit up a cigarette, and walked away with just a couple of bruises and a sprained knee. Now that's badass, but actually jumping without a parachute by choice? Well, Travis Pastrana deserves some credit for that.
I saw that movie Point Break, and Keanu Reeves in the movie jumped out of a plane without a parachute and caught someone on the way down, and then I went parachuting for the first time. That's possible.
As cool as Pastrana is, he's not exactly known for being a world-class skydiver.
Kinda never know which way you're gonna open. Sometimes they do, but I used to know. So.
Understandably, Red Bull pretty much had zero confidence that he wasn't going to kill himself by doing this, so they straight up banned their team from working with him. But he found a way around that, convincing a 16-year-old kid who didn't even have a license to fly the plane, and roped in a couple of ex-military guys, one of whom had just 15 jumps to his name. After one practice, Travis casually launched himself out of the plane parachute-free, popped a couple of backflips before being clipped onto his partner midair and landing safely on the beach. It was pretty rad, although the Parachute Association didn't seem to think so.
You're not the first person to jump out of a plane without a parachute, but you're the first dumbass to post it on YouTube. So, we have to do something.
He'd lose his skydive license for a couple of years and get slapped with a hefty fine. But hey, Travis was back doing sketchy jumps in no time. Alright, so jumping out of a plane without a parachute is one thing. But landing without one? Well, that's a whole different ballgame. So far, besides Luke, only one other person has ever managed to pull that off. And that's this guy. In 2012, stuntman Gary Connery jumped from a helicopter at 2,400 feet. For 40 seconds, he flew at a speed of 70 miles per hour before becoming the first person to land parachute-free. But this was a very different type of stunt. For starters, this wasn't some $1 million sponsor-backed TV event. Gary literally just jumped into a pile of cardboard boxes, 18,000 of them, stacked 12 feet high.
There was no talk, just went out and did it, and I could really appreciate that.
But what made this possible was that Gary was wearing a wingsuit, which meant he could flare right before impact, reducing his speed to 50 miles per hour horizontally and 15 miles per hour vertically. And although he didn't use it, Gary did technically have a parachute on. Now, Gary's jump was definitely cool, but what Luke was planning was on a whole other level. For his, there would be no wingsuit, no parachute, and a free fall 10 times the height. And to pull something like that off, it was going to take some serious planning, not to mention a shit ton of cash. Naturally, Red Bull was first in line for the sponsorship because, come on, this has got them written all over it. But around that time, they were facing some heat after one of their base jumpers died, so they passed it up. Instead, Stride stepped up, a gum company known for getting creative with its commercials.
Oh, hey.
Spit it out, or Yeti will find you.
Oh, I like it. Yeah.
Funding was locked in, but if Luke was to actually survive this thing, then some important boxes needed to be checked off. First up was figuring out how to break the fall, without breaking him. The original idea was this giant kilometer-long slide.
In theory, it made sense. I just couldn't figure out a way to test that thing. How in the world do you test something like that?
Then there was this helium airbag, but they found the impact of hitting it would do more harm than good. So eventually, they settled on a 100-foot net strung up between 4 cranes, with air pistons to help cushion the landing. But when a test dummy broke through the original net, Luke reached out to Cirque du Soleil for some advice.
This is what these guys do, is fall from great heights. And I touched the net, I'm like, what is this? Where did you get it? And they told me what it was made out of, and I went home and looked it up.
Their nets were made from something called Spectra, a fabric that's ridiculously strong, yet super lightweight. It's so strong that pound for pound, it's 15 times stronger than steel, and used for heavy-duty stuff like body armor and space missions. With the new net setup, testing began. They dropped dummies from different heights, fine-tuning the setup to absorb the impact as much as possible. As far as live testing, well, it was pretty much non-existent. Luke only jumped into the trap once before the real thing, from a crane just 65 feet above the net. The next challenge was to actually make sure he landed in the trap. To help him hit the target, they borrowed a trick from the airport runway playbook and implemented a light guiding system. It kind of works like a human dartboard, 4 outer lights marking the edge of the net and 4 inner lights marking the center. Lenses inside the lights would mean Luke saw different colors depending on his position in the sky. If he was inside the target, he'd see them as white. If he was outside, then he'd see them as red. Once the tech was in place, all Luke had to do was send the thing. Sure, he'd spent the last 25 years jumping out of planes, but this was different, not to mention like a billion times more risky. He trained intensely for 6 months and fine-tuned rolling onto his back, a move he'd have to pull a second before hitting the net. He'd worked on his precision too, and for that, he was given special permission to open his parachute at a lower altitude of 1,000 feet, as opposed to the standard 3,000.
We decided we need to do 75 jumps in a row, opening your parachute directly over the top of this net below 1,000 feet. 75 times in a row, you can't crinkle up a piece of paper and throw it in a garbage can 75 times in a row.
After 2 years of preparation, everything was in place. Now there was only one thing left to do: make the jump.
Tonight, you're about to witness a once-in-a-lifetime, very special live event. Stride Gum presents Heaven Sent.
1.5 million people tuned in on the evening of July 30th. Weather conditions were perfect. The wind is blowing at a steady 7 miles per hour, just like it had been all week. The jump was on. But the day before, a last-minute ruling by the Screen Actors Guild almost shut the whole thing down.
24 hours ago, I was informed that I'm gonna have to wear a parachute to do this jump. That adds a complication that we didn't exist before.
although they backtrack minutes before the jump and allow Luke to go parachute free as planned. Besides, it's not like anyone was actually insuring this thing anyway. But as he began the 30-minute ascent, doubts started to creep in.
You have an oxygen mask on and you just hear yourself breathing like Darth Vader, right? You're all alone. You can't talk because everyone has the oxygen on. And I started thinking, I had flashbacks of my son and my wife and like, hey, why am I doing this?
As the plane reached 25,000 feet, Luke climbed out, spotted the drop zone, gave a final nod to his support divers, then dropped into space. At this height, the thin air catapults him to a terminal velocity of 150 miles per hour within seconds. He relaxes into the jump, even throwing in a couple of unplanned practice rolls. As he nears 15,000 feet, he hands off his oxygen to his cousin. Then, at 12,000, he hears the first beep in his helmet, his GPS signaling the halfway mark. Here, he does a couple of dummy parachute pulls, an inside joke for all the skydivers watching. At 6,000 feet, he hears a second beep, now 3/4 of the way down. Seconds later, his team peels off and deploy their chutes, leaving Luke alone in freefall. 2,000 feet. He's perfectly over the net, all white lights. But as the wind gusts, it pushes him slightly off center. If you look closely, the outer lights stay white, but that inside left one is changed to red. Luke knows he's still within the safety zone, so he doesn't bother adjusting his position. Instead, just 1 second before impact, he flips onto his back and braces for the landing. The net snatches him out of the sky, just 25 feet off center. And even with the 5G deceleration, it was a perfect catch. Luke later said it felt softer than landing on a trampoline. After the comprehensive medical exam, consisting of a high five, the rest of his team rushed over to celebrate. And just like that, Luke Aikins pulled off one of the most underrated live stunts ever attempted.
I hope that a project like this teaches my son that if you have a dream or something that you think you can accomplish, and people say that it's not possible or you can't do it, that you can anything, whether it's you want to be a brain surgeon, you can focus on and make that your goal and you can achieve it.
What he pulled off that day was the holy grail of skydiving. It's like the first ascent of Everest or Tony Hawk's 900, except nobody's even thinking about recreating this, let alone actually doing it. In fact, I doubt we will ever see another stunt like this again. Nice one, Luke.